Hello.
David, hi, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Sorry for being a couple of minutes late. Last meeting just super duper overran, so apologies.
No worries, no problem at all. Glad you're here. I was sitting nice and peacefully in our back room, looking out onto my daughter being a pest in the garden, so no problem at all. How you
There's
doing?
something very nice and focusing about that, isn't there? So you
There
can you
is.
can you can see the fun but can't hear the noise. There's
Yeah,
got to be
yeah,
something
yeah.
nice
And
about that.
and I've locked the back door so she can't come in. Are you well? How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, good. It's busy times, I have to say, with everything that's happening, and I mean, I think we're reaching some sort of normality, but it's
Yeah,
definitely a different version of it right now.
it is, isn't it? It's mixed reports you hear from people. I think there's a lot of positives as well. I think a lot of people I certainly speak to are finding the remote working thing actually kind of pleasantly surprising and working very well. Um, don't know if it's probably the same for everybody, but I'm more productive, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think a lot of organisations. I mean, we've worked remotely for quite a long time. If I'm honest, so
Yeah,
people
yeah.
can kind of work from wherever they need to be. But
Mm,
do you know what? I think there's nothing like being around humans you like.
mm,
So
mm.
I think it probably depends on people's workplace. Some people are happy not having to go into their office. Some people miss the people. But I've always having been a consultant for nearly 15
Yeah,
years. Then
yeah,
remote working is par for the course really in
of
terms of
course.
the setup. But yeah, my kids are definitely starting to wonder why I'm here so much.
Yeah, the novelty's wearing off. I think I'm getting the same. I'm being told to go away a lot more than previously happened.
I mean, the first few times it's okay. It gets to you after a bit, doesn't it? But
So you're based in Norwich, Glenn said. Is that right?
I am, yeah.
So whereabouts
So,
are you?
so Thorpe St Andrews,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
east of Norwich. So
Yeah.
I mean, one good thing is not having to get on that train to get to Liverpool Street.
Oh, yeah.
But
That's always a blessing.
I mean, definitely there's a difference. I think on people who are working from home. I mean, Norwich is pretty secluded anywhere where we
Mm,
are.
mm,
It's sort of
mm.
fields and trees and all sorts of kind of around us. So
Yeah.
at least we can get out and go for a walk and get some sunshine and walk about. I think people who are. I mean, we've got people at 11FS who are, three people in a flat type vibe, and that must be
Sure.
really tough for people. So
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. Absolutely. We're the same. So I'm just kind of south of Norwich. So just kind
yeah,
of
really.
yeah. So out on the way to, I guess, the A146, out on the way
Oh,
towards
okay.
Beccles and Lowestoft and all of these various places. Yeah. So
Ah, weird.
it
See, I
feels
mean, if in a different world we could have done this face to face, couldn't we?
yeah, it feels even stranger speaking to someone who is literally just down the road.
Do you know what? Bizarrely, I just did a thing this morning. So I was talking to Damien Hughes, and I
Mm,
had a conversation with him and Jake Humphreys. And
Oh, cool.
Jake lives about 10 minutes from me as well.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of weird how many people. And actually, do you know what? In the fintech space, there's some interesting things happening in Norwich right now as well,
Right.
isn't there?
Right.
There's Snoop who've just launched
Yeah.
with Jane Ann Gardner, and there's lots of interesting things happening here. So
Mm.
it's a beautiful place to live, isn't it? But it's
It
just a pain
is.
in the ass to get to.
Yeah, you are kind of out in the middle of nowhere and stuck, aren't you?
Yeah.
What should
Well,
seemingly be a very short journey takes hours and hours to get anywhere.
it does. I mean, I joke to people we've been practicing isolation for the last 50 years, So
Look, we'll get started. I'm sure you're equally busy as I am, regardless of being at home. Did you get the questions that were sent over yesterday?
I did. I mean, I'm always happy to talk about whatever you want to go to. So, you sort of control the conversation, and I'll
Sure.
answer anything you ask.
Yeah, so look, you've had an initial conversation with Glenn. I know. I guess this is a kind of keynote piece for FinTech magazine. Obviously centered around that kind of FinTech leaders showcase, but again, it's picking your brains on some aspects of the industry and working through some of those questions. Really, they're just a kind of a basis and an infrastructure for the chat. So anything you want to digress into, feel free to do so.
Sure.
But look, we'll get started and kind of work our way through and see where we get to. I mean, I guess first question, obviously we don't need to dwell on it too long, but it's always good to kind of get the ball rolling. Perhaps just a sort of brief introduction to yourself. Again, I suppose in the context of that leadership space. So perhaps a little bit more about your experience as a leader and I guess how that's sort of influenced your more recent approach, both in the industry and how you kind of approach your work at 11FS.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? You broke up ever so slightly.
Yeah, so it's just an intro question, really. So I guess a bit of background information in terms of your experience within the context of that sort of leadership piece.
Sure.
So how that kind of influences your approach to the industry and your work at 11FS?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my background before 11FS, so I've been a management consultant. I ran Gartner's global digital banking practice. I ran the digital banking practice at Infosys, a big Indian offshoring company. Before that, at Lloyd's Banking Group with various different leadership roles, and similarly at Aviva, the large global insurer. Leadership for me is always interesting one. People talk about management roles and leadership.
Yeah.
I think I've always sort of taken a view that leaders are more important than managers, if that makes sense, because
Absolutely.
they sort of come from everywhere around the organization. It's more about how people approach things. I go back to the saying about it's not really what you do that matters most, it's the way in which you do it, which, depending on how old you are, it's either Bananarama song or it's one from the 1920s. So for me, the way is so much more important. And the way that I've picked up through that career, good experiences with leaders and managers, and pretty bad experiences with leaders and managers, has really helped me shape what my view on that is. I think great leaders are as consistent as they can be for everybody else, but are incredibly contextual. I think the best people realize that every individual is different, and therefore leads with the levers that actually are most applicable to the person that they're talking to, and leads them as an individual. Sure. I often kind of go back and say, I think I learned more about leadership through playing team sports than I ever did in the business world, because you learn very quickly in there. It's not just physiology, it's psychology. And you really have to treat every individual as an individual to understand what motivates them in order to get the best performance out of them. And actually, I mean, how we've set up 11FS, I brought many of the learnings from playing. I think I played 11 different county sports, so I have all of the fancy ties to go to with that one. So, but from my perspective, taking that sports mentality into business has allowed us to build this company that we've got.
Sure. And so I guess translating that to 11FS, obviously I picked out that kind of the greatest minds in FinTech phrase that you kind of use on LinkedIn and so on. I suppose in terms of leading those kind of people, in some ways that's easier, but does that change how you approach managing people who are really knowledgeable and experienced and can effectively do their job without that leadership as a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody, regardless of how smart they are, I think needs leadership. But the context of leadership very much changes depending on people's experience. I mean, I always say I'm a macro manager rather than a micro manager. And actually, I believe in macro management over micromanagement, because I think, especially when you're leading people who are, not just very experienced, but incredibly smart, then things that people would need to do for people who have got less experience or show less impetus wouldn't work in the context of doing it for really, really smart people. So whether it's Jason Bates, who co-founded Starling and Monzo, or whether it's Naz, who was head of risk at RBS, or Lida Gliptis, who's run big departments over in Qatari National Bank or BNY Mellon, these people don't need me for subject matter expertise in the way that they do. But actually, in terms of leadership, I don't think it's that. I think good leaders set what the bar is, and actually what the floor is for behaviors on a day-to-day basis. They're more, particularly when you're talking about very, very high caliber individuals, it's much more of akin to a conductor in an orchestra than it is necessarily a sergeant major in the army. I say we are much more like the special forces than the army, because actually with the caliber of people that we have, and actually I think you get the best out of people by setting objectives and setting direction for them, but leaving gaps for them to actually use their own personal understanding and take personal responsibility for the decisions that they're making to achieve those things. So this is where I think sports mentality comes in even greater, because you've got, I don't know, Cristiano Ronaldo on a football pitch, then the way in which the manager of that team needs to work is very specific to make sure that they get the best out of them. And across 11FS, with nearly 200 people now in the organization, I'd say across all of the disciplines that we've got, we've got 200 Cristiano Ronaldos across the setup, which is a great thing in terms of bringing the focus about. So it just requires a very different level of management and skill set to manage those people.
Sure. And what about the financial services sector then, specifically? I mean, in terms of culture, I mean, it's fair to say that the sector is pretty disruptive and evolving at a pretty rapid rate. I mean, in terms of how you instill a culture within a business and you're reacting to that, I mean, is there anything specific about working in this industry in that kind of regard?
Yeah, I mean, culture I think culture, if I'm honest with you, is our secret sauce.
Right.
And actually, I think it's such a misunderstood thing. People think about culture as this sort of ethereal, nice to have, that after they've delivered their business objectives, they'll make sure that everybody gets a birthday card or a cookie. It becomes something about copying Google or, looking at what Facebook have done and maybe allowing people to wear jeans on a Wednesday. And culture isn't that. I mean, if you think about culture more about performance management, then actually, and I don't mean performance management in the sense of, every year we're going to give you an appraisal, but actually across all businesses, people are typically the most expensive resource. This is the most significant cost across your organization. And most people spend so little time prioritizing the creation of the tactics and the strategy and the culture that actually ensures that you get the best out of the people in that organization. We say our vision is to change the fabric of financial services, but our mission is purely about unleashing talent. How do we bring together a group of people who are really, really smart, but allow them to create the environment that will get the best work that they've ever done? Because if we can do that, then actually they will be more successful. And as an organization, by proxy, we will be more successful because of that. And that's really what we've done, over the last 4 years is, we practice very much power to the edges in terms of decision making and being able to move things forwards and allow everybody to make decisions in the organization. And we focus very, very heavily on making sure that actually the culture that we establish creates that environment where people are empowered to do the best work that they've ever done.
Sure. And I guess that culture, that sort of mindset is driven, as you say, by that sort of overarching strategy in a way, which I'd like to move on to. I mean, the digital financial services, only 1% finished kind of phrase. I mean, a really interesting one, obviously sort of sets out your stall very clearly. I guess as a kind of starter for 10, could you sort of expand on what, I mean, I understand what the phrase means, obviously, but can you sort of give your view on it and a bit more about that statement as a concept, how you sort of quantify that, and where I guess you see the key issues that mean we're only at 1%?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I should say there is not there's not 10,000 surveys behind this that make this statistically significant.
Of course.
But that is the point. Actually, it is really when you look at the narrative that we see in the industry is having spent time at big organizations, having spent time in those people who are serving those organizations as well. There are large parts of the industry that are just fundamentally broken.
Right.
There are large parts of it that are fundamentally decades and decades out of date now. And the difficulty is that the whole ecosystem within financial services has come a long way, but actually in order to keep up with the market that's shifting, we've got organizations, in this crisis that we're seeing now with the pandemic around Corona, we're seeing organizations sort of furiously trying to find people with COBOL experience, and this issue has only been exacerbated by the need to make rapid change. So when we say digital banking is 1% finished, what we really mean is that with all of the advancements around regulation or technology or customer requirements or competitive landscape, that fundamentally the journey that we're on with financial services has got 99% to go. There is huge amounts of opportunities, huge amounts of potential to move this industry forwards. And actually the interesting thing is that the big incumbent financial services players are really at pretty significant risk of being left behind because what is digital and what is digitized are so fundamentally different things at this stage. And with many of them having come from an analog world where branch was key and telephony then was an extension of that. digital has become this sort of, again, a period of evolution that they've sort of done from a veneer level. But when it comes to the underpinning capability that sits underneath that, whether it's technologically or operationally, they really run the risk of being massively left behind. What I think has been fascinating over the last couple of weeks with everything that's happened with Corona is when really forced to do something like, let's say, deploy thousands and thousands of people working remotely, they can make it happen. So what I think sort of developed during, from 2008 and the financial crisis was, most big organizations have just been in their shell for a very long period of time. So, but for us, like I say, digital banking being 1% finished it sounds like an indictment, but really it is, it's more an aspiration that for the amount of money, for the billions of pounds that are being spent, we should be doing a lot better to serve customers in whole different types of ways.
Of course, and the sort of digital as a veneer phrase is an interesting one, and I guess that's where your kind of consultancy services and that sort of fund. There's a lot on the website where you talk about sort of getting that fundamental infrastructure right. I mean, is that an essential step for any incumbent, or indeed perhaps any fintech that really wants to truly embark on this digital journey? Do you think really get those fundamentals right in the first instance?
Definitely, I think there's a confluence of forces there, though, because really, I mean, people talk about technology, technology debt or legacy technology as like the major inhibitor, but I honestly don't think it is the major inhibitor, because again, with the right culture within those organizations, then anything is surmountable, right? But actually, it's probably a confluence of technology debt, cultural debt, and operational debt. None of those inhibits people's aspirations. But actually, I think what you see is, banks spending billions and billions of pounds, having the right aspiration, having the right vision, but just the inability to actually get to that vision. I mean, the reason why I say that this is an industry problem, not just a bank problem, is, I mean, many of the people who support organizations to do those things, in many instances are like doctors who don't want people to get well. You're sort of able to make a project last as long as you want it to do. Then that for me is an industry problem that really sort of needs to be resolved. Very much of actually big organizations really need people with the skill sets and experience to know what should and shouldn't be doing. But a lot of this is really, other industries that we can learn from, technology industries, even the betting industry is an industry that financial services can look at. I mean, our CTO used to run the technology side of things for Betfair, and, lovingly jokes quite often, betting and banking isn't that much different. It's probably just a different license. Because actually, when you look at what they're both doing, both of them are managing risk. It's just actually betting has continually looked at how it reinvents and continues to evolve its technology, its operational capability, and these things are so heavily linked together. So many banks are looking at APIs and open banking or microservices kind of purely as a technology problem. But really, the manifestation of your culture and your operation is really beyond that sort of skin deep piece. It's hard to do continuous testing, continuous integration, and deploy 100 times a day unless you've got the technology underpinning it that actually allows those things to happen. So it would be great if there was one silver bullet that would fix all of this for people. But I do come back to that point that I made earlier on, which is it is fundamentally the way in which financial services operates, not just the what that they do. Now, it's definitely the what, but if you change the way, the what will change naturally as well.
Okay. So I guess this isn't just, as you say, it's an industry-wide problem. It's not really something that's just inherent to incumbents or legacy institutions, right? Is it fair to say it's most industry participants in some way, or?
Yeah, I'd say culture has a way of ossifying over time. And I think it's easy to see that in any slices of financial services, the newer organizations who are able to either keep more of an entrepreneurial spirit. If I look at somebody like BlackRock as an example, not in comparison to some of the players that they're up against in this market are, a toddler in comparison to the the OAPs of the industry. And because of that, they've got a culture that actually is continually evolving and continually moving forwards. If you look at a player like Investec as a good example as well, they've kept a very entrepreneurial spirit, which means they sort of ask why not rather than why.
Sure.
Whereas actually, if you look at some of the big incumbent organizations, they've sort of ossified around. Every company works on these types of silos. The thing that made them successful to start with, they ossify around.
Yep.
And when the world shifts and the market conditions shifts, then the thing that they were great at is no longer really the thing that the industry needs. Now, in most financial services, this is people and it is branches.
And
actually, digital was merely invested in as another distribution channel, which is why we see many organizations treat it like a completely separate thing that was happening. Digital is everything. It's not just a distribution channel.
Well, that's it. That's interesting, actually, isn't it? Because, a lot of the times, particularly with the sort of incumbent institutions, you see that they kind of park digital in one corner through innovation labs or a smaller kind of startup organization within the organization. I mean, I'm guessing in the long term that's not really the best approach, because, as you say, digital should be prevalent across the entire organization, right? And where do you sort of stand on that collaboration aspect between incumbents and fintechs? I mean, do you think that's a sort of future path that will bring benefit to the industry, or do you think that incumbents really must digitize every aspect?
Yeah, I think for me, partnerships as an entirety, I think is a major step forward for big incumbent organizations, because I think, from people like Simon Sinek to all the way to Clayton Christensen, and it's commonly understood that making this type of change is really, really difficult. We shouldn't underplay how difficult it is if you're the CEO of a bank looking down across your entirety of your estate, changing the thing that has made you successful, or risking your today's business model for tomorrow's success is a very difficult thing to do. And this is why we're sort of seeing lots of different people making different plays in order to evolve the organization, move them forward. So, partnerships are definitely a way forward, I think, because the ability to, culture is such an odd thing, because really it's just the makeup of all of your individuals. How they all are, how they all act on a day-to-day basis denotes how your organization responds to change. It's like a shoal of sardines. You can't say which one is quite leading that thing, but that they're all moving in unison to a certain degree. So for me, the beauty of partnering with other organizations is it's very similar to the old thing of you've got an old dog, buy a new pup, and actually they'll probably get a new spring of life in terms of learning new ways or jogging around the garden a little bit more merrily. And with those big incumbent organizations, learning that new way is critical for them sort of unlocking the potential that they have. I mean, we're now in a situation where, with advancements around technology and process and structure, that with 50 people who are really, really good, you can do what 500 people used to be required to do even 3 or 4 years ago. So for many, that is a cultural and a process leap, which just doesn't compute given the frame of reference that they really, really have. So whether it's partnering with an organization to create capability outside of the organization, or whether it's, to your point, creating a challenger to your own organization, like we've done with people in Hong Kong and the US and the UK. Actually, I think there are various different plays now, because what people are, it's that definition of madness, right? People have tried it the same way 5 or 6 or 7 different times, established that big transformation program, and got to the end of it and realized either the market context is dramatically changed and the thing that they've delivered doesn't meet those needs, or that they never really meet their action with their aspiration. So it's, again, I should say, it isn't like this is not hard, but it's a lot easier if you don't try and change 300,000 people in an organization overnight. And that's why many of these things, in many instances, it's starting something new and scaling it back into the organization is a much, much better approach, in definitely in my opinion and my experience.
Okay, so just taking it back a little, I guess, and we were sort of dancing around those questions. But if you're looking at the sort of market context and the key drivers of change, I mean, I guess firstly, how urgent would you sort of say is the need for digital reformation in first instance, and what do you or what does 11FS consider to be the real key drivers of change and evolution in the market at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd say technology is advancing faster and being commoditized quicker than ever before. So, I mean, the best example I always kind of go to on that one is, there's many big incumbent organizations who are and have been spending the last 5 to 7 years talking about cloud deployment and cloud strategy. And actually, the reality of it is when you really look at any startup, no startup starts with a plan of trying to figure out where their 3 data centers are going to be.
Sure.
The context of the industry of where you would start a business today as opposed to where you would start a business 30 years ago is just fundamentally different. The thing I'd sort of say is, while FinTech has really created a narrative of and an urgency of change, given its march on the industry. We've seen players like Monzo, in 3.5 years generate 5 million customers. To put that in context, First Direct took 30 years to get to about 1.4 million customers. So the speed of change in the industry is exponential at this stage in terms of the impact that can have. But I'd say the biggest one, if you're the CEO of a bank right now, is not how nice the Challengers apps look or anything along that. It's a fundamental squeezing of your profit margins, and that really being driven by unit economics in your back office. If you look at most big incumbent organizations right now, it's costing them somewhere between maybe 170 and 250 pounds to run a current account. Now, this is a huge piece, especially with margins and profits being taken out of those things. And most of that is because the technology and the operational capability in the back office just cannot sustain them. And due to many monoliths that sit in the back office from a technology stack perspective, due to mergers and acquisitions over the last 30 or 40 years, it's very, very difficult for them to do anything about that. So, you've got a burgeoning operational cost. You've got challengers coming into the market who are much more operationally efficient, are much more nimble to make changes really, really quickly. And all of this combined with a regulatory climate, a regulatory pressure that's actually reducing the bar of entry into financial services rather than defending you in the way that it used to do. If you're the CEO of a bank right now, that's the thing that's worrying you. And it's a bizarre sort of confluence of these pressures. But really, I mean, when it cost you 150 and the blue one next to you 160 and the other one 190, things were all pretty relevant, and relative rather. And actually what we've sort of seen is a real resetting of what good looks like within financial services, both in terms of customer service. I mean, almost for a decade, First Direct has been at the top of any customer satisfaction or NPS rating, and now it will be Starling, Monzo, Revolut. When it comes to unit economics and what it should cost to run an account, or even what it should cost to acquire a customer, these things are being fundamentally reset now because it's no longer spending £100 million with an ad agency, Mad Men style, to make sure you've got that TV advert around Coronation Street. It's about actually how do you use social media more intelligently to build a brand that people love and belong to. And all of these dynamics of it is, facilitated by this wonderful thing called the internet. Yeah,
sure. And I mean, I guess, and where does the consumer come into it? Obviously, consumer and customer expectations evolving at a massive rate as well. Again, probably due to technologies that we use and being glued to our mobiles 24/7 and things like that. Obviously, the fintechs and the newer players can kind of, is it fair to say, offer a more personalized service because of perhaps some of the technologies that they're using? So how is that kind of customer demand driving change for banks, for those in the sector, and what really would you say are the key ways of kind of dealing with that and managing that change from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from a consumer perspective, I'd say there's probably two main drivers for that. I'd say trust and control. I mean, on the trust side of things, it's really post-crisis. Everything that happened in 2008, the financial services industry was really, really heavily hit when it came to trust. I mean, I think people trust banks not to disappear with their money, but they don't trust them to do the right thing by them. And actually, I think if you look at the control side of things, people want to feel empowered. They want to feel in control of their money and their situation. And actually just the context of banking during the last decade of, go into a branch, queue up neatly, wait to see that nice man or woman in a suit to ask if you might please have some money. The context of that is very much shifting. And given the choice that consumers now have, consumers are in more control than they ever have been around access to credit, access to savings, access to lending. So the narrative of the industry of I'm in charge, I'm the bank, and I'm a trusted bowler hat wearing Mary Poppins-esque kind of narrative has very much moved to consumer control, because at everybody's fingertips is 24/7 access to a plethora of organizations who fundamentally want to serve them as customers. I'd say the other thing is, and this is really sort of combined with again, since sort of post 2008, just the risk frameworks and controls that have been built into large incumbent organizations has led many of them to not really communicate with people like people. I mean, if you look at the communications on websites or emails, or it is fearful of the regulation rather than communicating to humans like humans. And actually what many of the new challenges have come in is really just dispel a lot of these things. It's how do we ensure that actually consumers are really in control? How do we make them really aware of what their financial standing is 24/7, 365? How do we just talk to them as human beings? Because wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that just be a better way of actually communicating to people? Because if you're trying to create trust, if the only time you communicate with them is that there's something negative, well, if that only happened with your friends, you're not going to be friends with those guys for very long, are you? And then when it comes to the other elements, then I think fundamentally what we're seeing FinTech and the challenges do is really just rekindle services within financial services. I think beyond the big incumbents, this is really what people are trying to do, because what people want to do with their banking is mainly not engage with it, but when they have to, they want to do it in the most friendly, easiest to consume way that they can do. That actually means they get the best outcome. Banking is boring. Nobody cares about it until you do and until you need it. But when you do and when you need it, you want it in a way that actually you are the customer. The service should be to you rather than the other way around. So, I mean, it is a fundamental flip of what financial services is really about. But I think it's a very welcome one, and actually a one that was really speared by everything that the Bank of England and the FCA did post financial crisis. Many people don't really know this, but the lowering of the barriers of entry and the increasing of competition in the marketplace is because of what the FCA and the Bank of England did over the last 12 years at this stage. And that's really why consumers on the street are benefiting from better financial services than we've ever had.
Right, and that continuing to improve the service for the consumer, the talking to people like people, the offering a plethora of service and so on. I mean, is that or do you see that as being a sort of technology-led thing, or is that a change in culture? Is that a change in how, I guess, leaders and those working for banks and incumbents and fintechs actually really consider the operating model?
I think it's I think technology definitely facilitates it, but if I'm honest with you, I think it's for big incumbent organizations, it's kind of rekindling the love of customer experience. And I don't mean customer experience just in the way of wireframing and that type of stuff, but fundamentally, do you understand the day-to-day, the brutal realities of day-to-day life for most consumers? The gap between what financial products are being given to people and the things that they really have to do on a day-by-day, month-by-month basis has widened quite
Yeah.
quite significantly. And when you start talking to consumers, the gap between those two things is amazing. It's really enlightening. From weird and wonderful mental arithmetic that people are doing to the most elaborate spreadsheets you've ever seen in your life. This is managing households or it's managing businesses. And really, FinTech is just coloring in that gap with learning from what it is that people really need to do on a day-to-day basis and providing that service rather than just providing a current account or a credit card or a savings pot. It's about the service that actually makes people better financially. And I think in the big organizations, again, it's the shifting landscape. It's the change of the food chain when it comes to really what is it that they are there to do. If you're really there to serve consumers, you need to understand them. The reality, I think, of many a boardroom and many a bank executive is it's very difficult to really understand the day-to-day life of a mum with 3 kids who is trying to make ends meet. So actually getting back into the mentality, getting back into the psyche of consumers is critical, because again, no bank started by offering 3,000 products and having 15 different business lines. They all started by the love and passion of really trying to fix a very specific problem, and then 300 years of success has led us to where we are today.
Cool. Interesting. I'm keen to sort of bring it on to 11FS, just to sort of get a bit more info. And so I suppose within the context of those things we've been talking about, look, I don't want to go through all of your services and things like that. It's an incredibly dull way to spend an interview. But perhaps you could tell me in a more broad sense about the sort of 11FS proposition, and within the context of those issues and those challenges that we've been discussing, how you work with those players in the industry to really sort of work around these challenges and I guess fill that 99% that's remaining from the 1%, as it were.
Sure. With that as a backdrop, really, we've been spending the last 4 years with various different players, from gigantic technology players to big incumbent organizations to startups. We've built out a proposition over in Hong Kong with Standard Chartered called MOX. We built with Alison Rose at NatWest Metal, which is a Challenger SME account. Over in the US, we've actually got in beta a US retail account as well. And we're doing this with, like I say, technology players, somebody like Grab over in Singapore, to build out their current account proposition as well. Because actually what we show to people is, if you take startup mentalities and methodologies, if you take the things that the FinTech has shown that there is possible, but apply those principles, those processes, the way to do it to big incumbent organizations, there are quicker, cheaper, better ways of actually getting this stuff to market. And in many organizations, that's really what we're doing. We often lend our culture as a company to these things to really spark that creativity back into those organizations. And then tend to that as much as we would tend to anything else, because again, for us, culture is the fundamental. If you get that right, if you have that focus, then actually the talent that you can bring in, the talents that you can maximize, really takes you to the places that you need to serve the customers in a different way. So the other side of the business that we've got at 11FS is a thing called 11FS Foundry, which is actually a partnership that we've got with really sort of putting our money and our action where our mouth is on this one, which is the technology in banking just requires, it's not about a rethink, it's about starting from scratch. If you really want to deploy cloud services and microservices, if you want to be able to do continuous testing, continuous integration in a real way, then breaking down these monoliths that have been built by, like say, success, through merger and acquisition, but unless you rationalize all of those things, you're never going to be in a situation where you address that operational cost problem. And for us, this is what Foundry's set up to do. DNB have been a phenomenal partner. For anybody who doesn't know, they're the largest bank in the Nordic region. And they have a very similar view of the future as we do, which is consolidating a lot of the back office capability to ensure that actually cost efficiencies can be passed through to consumers. And we've been building through value chains with those guys, starting with unsecured credits and current accounts, and working through all of the elements to ensure that actually we help those guys really get to be truly digital.
Yeah. And on the Foundry aspect, so you're talking about rather than a rethink, the complete restructure and a restart almost. I mean, is that daunting for those players that you sort of that proposition goes to? I mean, is that something that you think is inherently challenging to accept, and that's why we're in this situation almost?
I mean, it's a huge problem, and it's a huge thing to address, and it's not just the rational side of things, because I mean, if you think in a big organization, take HSBC as an example, or Barclays, whoever, you're talking about maybe 70 different systems across all of the things that they're doing. And across those 70 systems, there's probably 18 to 20 layers in them. And each of those layers is probably a different service provider that you've got involved in it. So your ability to deal with this entire picture is a procurement nightmare of all of the contracts of all of these things, and the ROI that you've invested in to put them in together. Like, it would have to be the equivalent of the entirety of the solar system aligning for a split second, your ability to deal with it just on a procurement level. And this is why, I mean, we're in the situation that we're at is in an organization of any scale where you've got multiple CIOs and CTOs and CEOs, each with their own different agenda, each with their own different investment potential, then the complexities of actually addressing these problems is insane. Let alone when you start to get to the more emotional sense, which is most people have been there when bad decisions have been made about technology or investment, or they're still waiting for the ROI from the thing that they put in 3 years ago. So it by no means is this an easy thing to do, but that's why the cleanness of many organizations to start something new is allowing them to address wholesale all of these problems. There's the old kind of adage of, look, if you've got 85 different standards and you deploy and create a new stack, hey presto, you've got 86 standards, right? But the reality that we're seeing with the changes that we've been putting in place in organizations is it doesn't really matter anything at all until you start decommissioning things. And when you can start to decommission old systems and remove complexity, remove insane amounts of risk that these organizations are dealing with, then actually you can start to show the real impact of what doing it in a different way actually matters. I can't stress that enough. The way in which you set these things up is so much more important than anything that you're doing. Because, I mean, if you look at a comparison, Monzo in the market have consistently said they can go from a good idea to it being live in the market in 3 or 4 weeks. Now, to put that in context, you probably couldn't even deploy something. I mean, you probably couldn't even get the meeting together to understand who was responsible for fixing the thing in a big organization, let alone build it, let alone deploy it. These guys have got the technology and the operations to deploy 100 times a day. And because of that, it fundamentally changes the risk in their systems, because if everything is small, then the risk that everybody takes every deployment is very small. With a big bank, with the technology that they've got, the processes, the governance, everything is big. Therefore, if something goes wrong, it's really wrong. And given the technology, it's really wrong for a long time until they can actually resolve it.
Yeah, I see. So I mean, in terms of that journey and embarking on that journey, I mean, what does it look like in a timescale? I mean, it seems, obviously, from the things you were just saying, incredibly challenging. I mean, we don't want to keep dwelling on this 1% because, like you said, it's not a hard and fast thing. But I mean, in terms of that journey, in terms of 11FS's vision, I guess, I mean, how long is that journey? Is that sort of transformation journey for those larger players? I mean, and how difficult and challenging do you think it will be?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing is, and wanting to sort of give some positivity is,
of course,
this is the the greatest time to actually make these changes, because these problems have always occurred, but your ability to actually address them, given the advancements that we've seen around technology, is more significant than ever. And it's not really just about the fact that you can do it, it's the fact that you're seeing people in the market actually achieve these things. So for me, whether it's the changes that somebody like Alison at NatWest has made to really invest in building the new business. I mean, her point has always been, should I wait till somebody comes along and disrupts us, or should I put in the time and put in the work to disrupt ourselves? And that I think is the major change that you're seeing, very similar to the CEO at Standard Charter, the CEO over at Bank of America. All of these organizations now are realizing that if they wait to the point where it's too late, then it will be too late. So for me, I think the opportunity for these organizations is there. But if a startup can start up and scale to 5 million in a very, very short period of time, this gives them the hope that actually they can change all of their real problems when it comes to operational cost and everything that's there. I mean, if you gave me NatWest right now with an operational cost of Monzo, that would be the most profitable bank on the planet.
Right.
And actually, if you could make those changes, which for us, there's no witchcraft to this at all. Technology is not sort of magic where you've got to, rub your head and do it.
It's all there, right?
Exactly. It's not just all there; it's all obvious.
Yeah.
It's like getting fit. Everybody knows what it takes to be fit and be healthy. It's like do exercise. It's like eat well. Burn more calories than you're taking in. The reality of doing it is hard. So really what we're seeing is actually CEOs that we talk to have now realized the way that they were doing it before just isn't going to get them to what they need to do. And many now are embarking on this change. But the thing that they have to do is work hard. You can work hard in the wrong direction and not achieve these objectives. Working hard in this new direction is what unleashes the potential within their organization, and definitely has been what's unleashed the potential in ours.
Which I guess is what brings us back to why culture is so important and really underpins it probably more than any of the technologies that we talk about and that are thrown around. When you're talking about digital disruption, it really does seem that underpinning culture is essential, right? Which is what 11FS kind of professes and says to its customers, I suppose.
100%. It's the culture in any organization makes change sustainable. And if we're talking about big gaps between how you think about consumers, how you think about technology or operations, it's not just about bringing in smart people who know how to do that. It's about learning and being in a situation where you understand that yourselves. I mean, we talk a lot about in our role, it's not about coming in and doing it for people. It's about teaching them the way that these things should be done. More like a personal trainer than a consultant, really, because I mean, if we came in and did all the work, then actually it wouldn't be sustainable for these organizations. So us lending our culture to many of these startup operations means actually it gives them the feeling and the warmth of how impactful it can be when you do it in a different way, which actually then leads to our culture permeating their culture and creating a new way of doing it within their company. And then, like say, that sustainability, either from a process or a resourcing or any type of process, means that we don't need to be involved forever, which is good for us and it's very good for them as well.
So just finally, David, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know we're getting to the end of the hour. I mean, in terms of the future for 11FS, then obviously you will evolve as the industry evolves and the market evolves. I mean, where do you sort of see the business, and what are your intentions for the business, certainly within the next sort of couple of years or so, in the next 3 to 5 years, let's say? I mean, how are you looking to evolve the business?
Yeah, I mean, keeping up with demand is like the challenge to a certain degree. We've got more work than we sort of know what to do with, really, in terms of the, where we are in an industry, and actually people kind of really waking up to this change. I'd say, the first 4 years of the business, we've very much been on the most early change curve. So the really, really early adopters are the people who have maybe, a bit more successful, big incumbents are looking for the future. And I think what we're seeing over the last 6 to 12 months really is that go from the first 3% to the first 13 or 20%, meaning that actually the work that we have done has been early adopters globally in Hong Kong and Singapore and Africa and the US and all over the place. And what you see is the maturing of each of those markets means the way in which we're saying to go about these things becomes, more adopted, therefore more and more work. So for us, I see us getting, bigger and having more impact on the consultancy side of things. I think Foundry as a business, I think could eclipse everything. Just because really when it comes to the technology side of things within banks, it is like the real fabric that holds them back. And actually there are not many players in the market who are really aggressively and as boldly approaching fixing that as we are. Cool. So I think the way in which we've approached that with the partnership with DNB really gives not only a good idea, but the practical application against a very large organization, which, we always say it never really matters until it's been deployed at scale for financial services. So for me, I see this problem is not going to be going away anytime soon. We might get to 2% at some point, but it's only going to be a lot of hard work.
Great. That's fantastic. We've run through everything I sort of had on my list there. Really good stuff. Is there anything that I haven't kind of mentioned or we haven't touched on that you think is important? I mean, we touched on coronavirus. I don't want to talk about it too much. Everyone talks about it, but I mean, I guess one thing I always ask is if you see a sort of way back to the ways of before, isolation and remote working and things like that. I mean, do you think that certainly will irrevocably change the way we kind of approach business models and banking and technology use?
I'd say that, the beautiful thing, Corona is obviously a horrific thing that's going to happen, and there's lots of people kind of losing their lives. I think if anything, it's sharpenly focused for financial services that digital is no longer optional. The idea of, the immediate announcements around, help or SME funding, go into your branch and talk to, wait, no, you can't leave your house. Okay, wait, we can't do processes. That is a very difficult reality to face into. So I hope people's memories are very long on this one, that actually digital now is the way, not a way that they can invest in. And because of that, actually, I see a real galvanizing, a real acceleration of the type of work that we do. Because if anybody coming out of this realizes that or thinks that the internet or digital is no longer a thing that they think about, then I think there's probably a pretty bad future ahead for them.
Yeah, that would be troubling.
It would be a troubling one. But you don't rule it out, right? People have been holding on to branch networks and all sorts of stuff for a really long period of time. But I think the key to that though is that I think people have seen digital and human as different ends of a continuum. And the reality is that if you do digital in the right way, it might be the most human channel that you have to offer people. Definitely the most consistent human experience that you can offer people. And actually, I think getting that right means that you've got a operational efficiency in the business that you've never really seen before. And if you can deploy that against tens of millions of customers, like many of the big incumbents do have, then that actually is a very bright recipe for success.
Great. Look, that's great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time this morning. Happy we've covered everything. Obviously, as ever, if there's anything else that pops up, assuming you don't mind me just dropping you an email or sending any questions over. If we're ever allowed out on the streets of Norwich again, it'd be nice to have a coffee or to have you into the office to have a chat.
Sounds good.
Yeah, but thank you so much. And likewise, if there's anything else that you want to talk about, do get in touch. Once it's drafted up, I'll share the draft with you so you have a chance to have a look at that. And obviously, we'll stay in touch and keep the lines of communication open as we progress. Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Well, you better go and let your kid in. And
still outside. Leave her out there all day. It's fine. Yeah, she can stay out for the day. Look, thank you so much. Stay safe. Look after yourself, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks. See you later.
Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.